The Frostborn Heir. Kasha Dorn had never known true cold until the night winter came for her. The town of Hollowmere had always feared the mountain's wrath, but she had never understood why until the lake froze solid beneath a sky that should have held stars. The wind whispered her name, carrying the scent of snow and something old. And then, from the blizzard, a figure emerged, a man with silver eyes and a presence that made the world hold its breath. "You were never meant for them," he murmured. "You belong to the frost." Chapter 1. The Unforeseen Chill of Hollowmere. The air in Hollowmere had always carried a certain crispness, a reminder of the looming presence of Mount Cinder, its peak perpetually dusted with snow even in the height of summer. But tonight, the chill was different. It bit with a ferocity that settled deep in Kasha Dorn's bones, a cold that felt older than the ancient stones of the town itself. She pulled her worn woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, her breath misting in the frigid air as she hurried along the cobbled street. The annual harvest festival was in full swing, the usually lively market square now eerily quiet, the colorful stalls mostly deserted. Only a handful of townsfolk remained, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and stubborn defiance. Kasha, however, felt a pull towards the usually bustling lakefront, a sense of unease she couldn't shake. She had lived in Hollowmere all her 57 years, tending to her small apothecary shop, a legacy from her grandmother. Her life was a tapestry woven with the familiar rhythms of the seasons, the scent of dried herbs, and the quiet companionship of the townsfolk. Love had been a fleeting visitor in her youth, a brief, bright flame extinguished too soon, leaving behind only a faint ache and a quiet resignation. She had found solace in her work, in the healing power of nature, and in the simple routines of her days. But tonight, routine felt fragile. The lake, usually a shimmering expanse reflecting the moon and stars, was a solid, opaque sheet of ice. It had frozen over in a matter of hours, a phenomenon unheard of in Hollowmere's history. The ice groaned under some unseen pressure, the sound echoing across the deserted square like a mournful sigh. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at Kasha's heart. This wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural.
"Kasha!"
A voice, rough with worry, cut through the stillness. It was Mayor Alara, her face pale in the flickering lamplight, her usual jovial demeanor replaced with a strained urgency. "You shouldn't be out here. It's not safe." Kasha forced a reassuring smile, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I needed some air, Alara." "It's unsettling, isn't it?" Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the frozen lake. "The elders, they say it's a sign. An old warning." She shivered, though not entirely from the cold. "They say the mountain is waking." The mountain Mount Cinder was more than just a geographical feature, it was a presence, a silent guardian, and, according to the old tales, a slumbering giant. Kasha had always dismissed the legends as folklore, stories to frighten children. But looking at the unnaturally frozen lake, at the fear in Alara's eyes, doubt began to creep in. "I should get back," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Lock your doors, Kasha. And stay inside." Kasha watched her go, the mayor's hurried steps echoing on the cobblestones. She turned back to the lake, drawn by an invisible force. The wind picked up, swirling snowflakes around her, each flake a tiny, icy dagger. It whispered through the bare branches of the trees, a sound that seemed to form words. Her name. Kasha, she shook her head, dismissing it as a trick of the wind, a product of her own growing fear. But the whisper persisted, growing stronger, more insistent. It wasn't just in the wind, it was inside her, a cold, resonant hum that vibrated through her very being. Then, the blizzard intensified. The snow fell thicker, faster, obscuring everything in a swirling white curtain. Visibility dropped to near zero. Kasha, disoriented and suddenly terrified, stumbled backward, her hand reaching out for something, anything, to anchor her. And then she saw him. He emerged from the heart of the blizzard, a figure coalescing from the swirling snow. Tall and imposing, he moved with a grace that defied the raging storm. He was dressed in furs, dark and thick, that seemed to absorb the light. But it was his eyes that captured her, held her captive. They were silver, like polished mirrors reflecting the cold moonlight that somehow pierced through the clouds. They held an ancient wisdom, a chilling intensity, and a hint of something sorrowful. He stopped a few feet from her, the wind and snow seeming to part around him, creating a pocket of eerie calm in the heart of the storm. The air crackled with an energy she couldn't explain, a palpable tension that made her skin prickle. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an unnerving focus. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate with the same frequency as the whispering wind. "You were never meant for them," he murmured, his words carrying an undeniable weight, a sense of inevitability that chilled her more than the blizzard ever could. Kasha's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to ask who he was, what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. Fear, raw and primal, held her tongue. He took a step closer, the silver in his eyes intensifying. The scent of pine and snow clung to him, a wild, untamed fragrance that both terrified and intrigued her. It was a scent she felt she should know, a scent that resonated with something deep within her, something long forgotten. "You belong to the frost," he said, his voice a low, hypnotic purr. He reached out, his hand, gloved in dark leather, hovering just inches from her face. The air between them shimmered, distorted, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to his will. Kasha felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her towards him, towards the cold, towards the unknown. It was a terrifying sensation, yet strangely alluring. It was as if a part of her, a hidden, dormant part, was awakening, responding to his presence, to his words, to the ancient power that radiated from him. The whispering wind intensified, swirling around them like a protective cocoon. The snow continued to fall, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt welcoming. She closed her eyes for the briefest moment, and a vision arose. It was her and snow, and a power she had never felt before. Was this how it would begin? Chapter 2. Whispers on the Frozen Wind. Kasha opened her eyes, the vision fading like a dream upon waking, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease and a strange, unfamiliar yearning. The man was still there, his silver eyes fixed on her, their intensity unwavering. His hand remained outstretched, a silent invitation, a promise of something unknown. She found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in every detail, from the strands of gray hair escaping her braid to the worn leather of her boots. It was a scrutiny that felt both invasive and strangely intimate. "You know who I am," he finally said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the wind. "Or at least a part of you does." His words were cryptic, frustrating, yet they struck a chord within her, a faint echo of recognition that she couldn't quite grasp. She shook her head, trying to dispel the confusion, the unsettling feeling that he knew more about her than she did herself. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the howling wind. "I've lived in Hollowmere my entire life. I know everyone here." A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that did nothing to soften the intensity of his gaze. "Hollowmere is but a speck on the tapestry of your existence, Kasha Dorn. Your roots run far deeper, to a place where the snow never melts, where the wind carries the whispers of ancient powers." He lowered his hand, the air between them seeming to sigh with relief, though the tension remained palpable. "You are not like them," he continued, his gaze shifting to the distant lights of the town, now barely visible through the swirling snow. "You carry the mark of the Frostborn, the legacy of a lineage long forgotten by the world." Frostborn, the word resonated within her, a cold, sharp echo of the vision she had just experienced. It felt both alien and familiar, a paradox that deepened the mystery surrounding this enigmatic stranger. I don't know what you're talking about," Kasha stammered, her mind reeling. She was a simple apothecary, a woman of routine and practicality. These fantastical notions of ancient lineages and forgotten powers felt utterly absurd. Yet, the undeniable power emanating from him, the unnatural cold that surrounded him, the strange familiarity of his scent, it all chipped away at her skepticism. "You will," he said, his voice laced with a certainty that sent a shiver down her spine. "The awakening has begun. The frost is calling you home." He turned his back to her, gazing out at the frozen lake, his silhouette stark against the swirling white landscape. "Come with me, Kasha. Leave this place behind. Embrace your true heritage." The offer was preposterous, insane. To abandon her life, her home, everything she had ever known, to follow a stranger into a blizzard, into the unknown, it was unthinkable. Yet, a part of her, the same part that had resonated with his words, with his presence, felt a powerful pull, a yearning for something she couldn't define.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice stronger now, fueled by a flicker of defiance. "Why me? What makes you think I would even consider such a thing?" He turned back to her, his silver eyes piercing through the darkness, holding her captive once more. "Because you are the last," he said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that seemed to echo through the ages. "The last of the Frostborn line, the only one who can awaken the ancient power, the only one who can save us." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Save whom? From what? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered, yet they stirred something within her, a sense of responsibility, a flicker of hope. She looked back at Hollowmere, at the faint glow of the lamp struggling against the blizzard. It represented safety, familiarity, a life she understood. But it also represented a life of quiet resignation, a life devoid of passion, of purpose. Then she looked at him, at the stranger who spoke of ancient powers and forgotten lineages, of a destiny she never knew she had. He represented the unknown, danger, uncertainty. But he also represented something more. Something that called to the deepest parts of her soul, a promise of adventure, of belonging, of finally understanding who she truly was. The wind howled around them, a symphony of ice and snow, a chorus of whispers that seemed to urge her on, to push her towards a decision that could change the course of her life forever. The cold no longer felt threatening, it felt invigorating. The fear was still there, but it was mingled with a growing sense of excitement, of anticipation. She took a deep breath, the frigid air filling her lungs, clearing her head. The decision, she realized, was already made. It had been made the moment she saw his silver eyes, the moment she heard his voice, the moment she felt the awakening within her. The wind carried her answer, and with the next flurry, she felt certain that she would go. Chapter 3. Silver Eyes in the Blizzard. Kasha began, her voice catching in her throat, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She swallowed, forcing the words out. "I don't even know your name." A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed his face, a subtle softening of his features that made him seem almost human. "I have many names," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate with the wind. "But you may call me Kale."
Kale.
The name felt foreign on her tongue, yet it resonated with the same strange familiarity as his scent, as his eyes, as the very air around him. It was a name that spoke of ancient power, of wild landscapes, of a world beyond the confines of Hollowmere. "Kale," she repeated, testing the sound of it, the feel of it. It felt right. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement, a subtle invitation to continue. "And what would happen if I refused?" she asked, the question a necessary formality, a lingering vestige of her former life, of her ingrained caution. She already knew the answer, had known it the moment she decided to trust the whispers on the wind, the pull in her soul. But she needed to hear it from him, to solidify the reality of her choice. His silver eyes darkened, the amusement fading, replaced by a solemn intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "The frost would claim you regardless," he said, his voice devoid of any trace of warmth. "But it would be a far less gentle awakening. You would be alone, lost, consumed by a power you wouldn't understand, a power that could destroy you." His words painted a bleak picture, a terrifying vision of a solitary struggle against an overwhelming force. It was a fate she instinctively knew she couldn't face, a fate she didn't want to face. "And if I go with you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I will guide you," he said, his voice softening, a hint of reassurance creeping into his tone. "I will teach you to control the power within you, to understand your heritage, to embrace your destiny." He offered her his hand again, the same hand that had hovered near her face earlier, the hand that seemed to radiate both cold and a strange, compelling warmth. This time, she didn't hesitate. She reached out, her fingers, stiff with cold, brushing against his. A jolt of energy surged through her, a powerful, exhilarating current that made her gasp. It was a feeling unlike anything she had ever experienced, a sensation of both intense cold and burning heat, of fear and exhilaration, of vulnerability and power. He closed his hand around hers, his grip firm but gentle, a silent promise of protection, of guidance. The blizzard seemed to intensify around them, swirling snowflakes creating a cocoon of white, isolating them from the world, from the past, from everything she had ever known. "Hold tight," he said, his voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. "The journey will be challenging." And then, he pulled her into the heart of the storm. The world dissolved into a blur of white, a chaotic vortex of snow and wind. Kasia clung to Kale's hand, her only anchor in the swirling chaos. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She could only feel the cold, the wind, and the powerful presence of the man beside her. She had no idea how long they traveled, time losing all meaning in the disorienting whiteout. It felt like an eternity, a journey through a dreamscape, a passage between worlds. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm subsided. The wind died down, the snow ceased to fall, and the world slowly came back into focus. Kasia gasped, her lungs burning with the frigid air. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sudden change in light. They were no longer in Hollowmere. The familiar cobbled streets, the quaint houses, the bustling market square, all were gone. They stood on a narrow mountain path, carved into the side of a sheer cliff face. Below them, a vast expanse of snow-covered wilderness stretched as far as the eye could see, a breathtaking panorama of jagged peaks, frozen rivers, and ancient forests. Above them, the towering summit of Mount Cinder loomed, its peak shrouded in mist, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The air was thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and snow, the same scent that clung to Kale. It was a wild, untamed scent, a scent that resonated with the newly awakened power within her. Kasia looked at Kale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. He was watching her, his silver eyes assessing, waiting. Where are we?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We are home," he said, his voice echoing with a profound sense of belonging, a deep connection to the land that she was only beginning to understand. "Or, at least, we will be." He released her hand, and she felt a momentary pang of loss, a sudden awareness of her own vulnerability in this strange, new world. But the feeling was quickly replaced by a growing sense of determination, a resolve to face whatever lay ahead, to embrace the unknown, to discover the truth about herself, about her heritage, about the power that now flowed through her veins. He gestured towards the path ahead, a narrow, winding trail that disappeared into the mist-shrouded peaks. "The journey has just begun, Kasia Dorn," he said, a hint of challenge in his voice. "Are you ready?" She looked at the path, at the daunting landscape that stretched before her, at the towering mountain that held both danger and promise. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, invigorating her spirit. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She was ready. But what was she ready for? That was the question that weighed heavier with every gust of frozen wind. Chapter 4. The Claim of the Frost. "Ready," Kasia echoed, the word feeling both a lie and a profound truth. The fear was still a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, A flicker of excitement, of anticipation, had ignited. This was madness, she knew, but it was a madness she had willingly embraced. Cale nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of her courage, or perhaps her foolishness. He started along the path, his movements fluid and effortless, as if he were a part of the mountain itself. Kasha followed, her steps less sure, her boots slipping occasionally on the icy patches. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the snow and the occasional sigh of the wind. It was a silence that amplified her thoughts, her doubts, her questions. "Cale," she said, her voice sounding loud in the stillness. "You said I was the last of the Frostborn. What does that mean? What is a Frostborn?" He didn't stop walking, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "The Frostborn were a people attuned to the power of winter, to the magic of ice and snow," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to blend with the wind. "We were the guardians of this mountain, the protectors of its secrets." "Guardians? Protectors?" Kasha repeated, struggling to reconcile these fantastical notions with the reality of her mundane life, with the memory of her quiet apothecary shop, her simple routines. "But I'm just an apothecary. I heal people with herbs, not magic." A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that did little to soften the intensity of his gaze. "You are more than you know, Kasha. The power of the Frostborn flows through your veins, whether you realize it or not. It has simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken." "And that moment is now?" she asked, her voice laced with a mixture of skepticism and a growing sense of wonder. "Yes," he said, his voice firm, undeniable. "The mountain is stirring. The ancient powers are reawakening. And you are the key." The key, the word resonated within her, a heavy weight of responsibility, of destiny. She was the key to what? To saving whom? The questions continued to swirl in her mind, unanswered, yet they fueled her determination to keep moving, to keep learning, to understand the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of her ordinary life. They walked for hours, the landscape slowly changing as they ascended higher into the mountains. The trees grew sparser, replaced by rugged rocks and wind-swept plains of snow. The air grew colder, thinner, making each breath a conscious effort. Kasha's body ached, her muscles screaming in protest, her lungs burning with the frigid air. But she pushed on, driven by a force she couldn't explain, a primal urge to reach their destination, to uncover the secrets that awaited her. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, they reached a small, sheltered cave, hidden behind a curtain of ice. Cale stopped, turning to face her. "We will rest here for the night," he said, his voice a welcome sound in the growing darkness. The cave was small and cramped, but it offered a welcome respite from the biting wind. Cale quickly built a fire, the flames crackling and popping, casting a warm glow on the icy walls. The heat was a blessing, thawing her frozen limbs, easing her aching muscles. He offered her some dried meat and a flask of something warm and strong, a potent brew that sent a wave of heat through her veins. She ate and drank gratefully, her body slowly coming back to life. As she sat by the fire, wrapped in her shawl, watching Cale tend to the flames, she felt a strange sense of peace. Despite the danger, the uncertainty, the sheer absurdity of her situation, she felt a sense of belonging, a connection to this wild, untamed place, to the man who had brought her here. "Cale," she said, her voice soft in the firelit cave. "What happened? Why am I the last?" He looked at her, his silver eyes reflecting the dancing flames, their depths holding a profound sorrow, a haunting memory. He hesitated for a moment, as if struggling with the weight of his own past. "There was a war," he finally said, his voice low and heavy. "A war between the Frostborn and others. Those who sought to control the mountain's power, to exploit it for their own selfish gains." He paused, his gaze drifting to the flames, as if lost in the memory of that ancient conflict. "We were betrayed," he continued, his voice laced with a bitterness that sent a chill down her spine. "Betrayed by one of our own." He led our enemies to us, and we were slaughtered. Kasha felt a pang of sympathy, a deep ache for the loss he had suffered, for the tragedy that had shaped his life, his destiny. She reached out, her hand instinctively seeking his, a gesture of comfort, of connection. He looked at her hand, his eyes widening slightly, as if surprised by her touch. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly, tentatively, he took her hand in his. The same jolt of energy surged through her, the same feeling of intense cold and burning heat, of fear and exhilaration. But this time, there was something more. There was a connection, a shared vulnerability, a silent understanding that transcended words. "I was just a boy," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I survived because I was hidden, protected. But I was left alone, the last of my kind." He squeezed her hand gently, his grip a source of comfort, of strength. "Until now," he said, his voice filled with a newfound hope, a fragile ember glowing in the darkness of his past. "Until you." The fire crackled, and the ice seemed to be weeping for a lost age, one that, if Kale was to be believed, was about to be reborn. It all rested on her. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. The warmth of Kale's hand in hers was a stark contrast to the chilling tale he had just recounted. The fire crackled merrily, oblivious to the weight of their shared silence, a silence filled with unspoken questions, with the echoes of a tragic past. Kasha withdrew her hand, the lingering warmth of phantom sensation on her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the cave. "This betrayer," she said, her voice hesitant. "Who was he? Why did he do it?" Kale's expression hardened, his silver eyes flashing with a cold fire that made her shiver. "His name was Lycus," he said, the name spoken with a venomous disdain that seemed to poison the very air. "He was my uncle. My father's brother." The revelation struck Kasha like a physical blow. Betrayal by a stranger was one thing, but betrayal by family, by someone so close it was a wound that cut deeper, a pain that resonated with her own past, with the loss of her own family, though under vastly different circumstances.
"Why?"
she repeated, the question a desperate plea for understanding, for some semblance of sense in this chaotic, unfolding narrative. Kale's gaze drifted to the flames, his face a mask of conflicted emotions, of anger, sorrow, and a lingering sense of disbelief. He craved power, he said, his voice low and bitter. He believed the Frostborn were too restrained. He wanted to unleash the full potential of the mountain's magic, to use it to conquer, to rule. He shook his head, as if still struggling to comprehend the depths of his uncle's ambition, the cruelty of his actions. He made a pact with dark forces. Forces that promised him ultimate power in exchange for our destruction. Dark forces, the words sent a shiver down Kasha's spine. She had always dismissed such notions as folklore, as tales to frighten children. But in this cave, surrounded by the tangible evidence of Kale's power, by the echoes of his tragic past, those notions felt terrifyingly real. "And these dark forces," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "are they still out there?" Kale met her gaze, his silver eyes holding a chilling certainty. "Yes," he said, his voice devoid of any doubt. "They are always out there, waiting, watching, seeking to exploit any weakness, any vulnerability." The weight of his words settled heavily upon her, a suffocating sense of dread, of impending danger. She was no longer just an apothecary from a quiet town. She was a pawn in an ancient game, a player in a conflict that spanned centuries, a conflict she was only beginning to understand. "But why me?" she asked, her voice filled with a desperate plea for clarity. "Why now?" After all these years, Kale's expression softened, a hint of tenderness creeping into his gaze. "Because you are the descendant of the one who hid me," he said, his voice gentle. "The one who ensured the survival of our lineage, the one who carried the seed of our power, waiting for the right time to bloom." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his touch sending a shiver of warmth through her cold skin. "You carry her strength, Kasha. Her resilience. Her magic, his touch, his words, ignited a spark within her, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her, stories of strong women, of hidden powers, of a connection to the natural world. She had always dismissed them as fanciful tales, but now she wondered if they were more than just stories. My grandmother, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She used to tell me stories about women like us. Cale nodded, his eyes shining with a knowing light. She was keeping the memory alive, he said, preparing you, in her own way, for this. For a destiny she never knew she had, for a role she never asked for a power she was only beginning to grasp. He withdrew his hand, the warmth fading, leaving behind a lingering sense of connection, of purpose. We should rest, he said, his voice practical, grounding. We have a long journey ahead of us. He banked the fire, creating a bed of embers that would provide warmth throughout the night. He offered her a thick fur blanket, and she wrapped herself in it, grateful for its warmth, for its comforting weight. She lay down on the cold, hard floor of the cave, her body aching, her mind racing. She looked at Cale, who was settling down across the fire from her, his back to her, his silhouette outlined by the flickering embers. He was a stranger, a mystery, a figure from a world she never knew existed. Yet, he was also her protector, her guide, her only link to a past she was only beginning to understand, to a future she couldn't yet imagine. As she drifted off to sleep, the whispers of the wind seemed to carry the echoes of her grandmother's stories, the murmurs of ancient powers, the promise of a destiny yet to be fulfilled. And the last coherent thought to form was the image of Lycus, a shadow in Cale's past, and perhaps a threat in her future. Chapter 6. The Mark of the Winterborn. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by vivid dreams of swirling snow, silver eyes, and a looming mountain that seemed to both beckon and threaten. Cash awoke with a start, her heart pounding, her body covered in a cold sweat. The fire had died down to embers, casting the cave in a dim, flickering light. Cale was still asleep, his back to her, his breathing deep and even. She sat up, pulling the fur blanket tighter around her, trying to shake off the lingering unease of her dreams. The air was frigid, the silence profound, broken only by the occasional crackle of the dying embers. She felt different. It wasn't a physical change, not exactly, but a subtle shift in her awareness, a heightened sensitivity to the world around her. The cold no longer felt oppressive, it felt invigorating. The silence no longer felt empty, it felt alive. She looked at her hands, turning them over and over, examining them in the dim light. They looked the same, yet she felt a tingling sensation beneath her skin, a faint hum of energy that she had never noticed before. She remembered Cale's words, his description of the Frostborn, their connection to the power of winter, to the magic of ice and snow. She remembered the jolt of energy she had felt when he touched her, the feeling of both intense cold and burning heat. She closed her eyes, focusing on that sensation, trying to recapture it, to understand it. She took a deep breath, the frigid air filling her lungs, and she felt something. A spark, a flicker, a faint echo of the power Cale had spoken of. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to a small, icy patch on the cave wall. She reached out, her hand hovering just inches from the ice, and she focused on that spark, on that faint hum of energy within her. And then it happened. A faint blue glow emanated from her fingertips, a soft, ethereal light that illuminated the ice. The ice shimmered, responding to her touch, to her will. Tiny crystals formed on its surface, intricate, delicate patterns that seemed to dance in the light. Kasha gasped, pulling her hand back, her heart racing. She looked at her hand, at the faint blue glow that still lingered on her fingertips, a tangible manifestation of the power within her. It was real. It was all real. The Frostborn, the magic, the destiny, it was all real. She looked at Cale, a sudden urge to share this discovery, this awakening, with him. But he was still asleep, and she hesitated to disturb him. She needed time to process this, to understand what it meant, to come to terms with the reality of her newfound power. She stood up, pacing the small confines of the cave, her mind racing. She was no longer just Kasha Dorn, the apothecary from Hollowmere. She was something more, something different. She was a Frostborn, a descendant of an ancient lineage, a wielder of a power she was only beginning to comprehend. As she paced, she noticed something on her wrist, a faint mark that she had never seen before. It was a small, intricate pattern of interlocking lines, resembling a snowflake, a delicate tracery of silver against her skin. She touched it, her fingers tracing the outline of the mark, and she felt a faint hum of energy, a connection to the power within her, to her heritage, to her destiny. It was the mark of the Winterborn, Kale had said. A sign of her lineage, a symbol of her power. She looked at the mark, at the tangible evidence of her transformation, and she felt a surge of something. Fear, yes, but also excitement, anticipation, a sense of purpose she had never known before. She knew she had much to learn, much to understand. She knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, challenging, uncertain. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. She had Kale, her guide, her protector, her connection to this new, unfolding world. And she had the mark, the symbol of her heritage, the promise of her power, the key to her destiny. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the entrance of the cave, painting the icy walls with hues of pink and orange, Kasha stood tall, her shoulders squared, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by a newfound determination, a growing sense of confidence, a resolve to embrace her destiny, to become the Frostborn she was meant to be. What would Kale say? Would he be surprised? Fear and anticipation mingled. The mark pulsed faintly, almost urging her on. It felt alive. Chapter 7. Sanctuary in the Shadowed Peaks. The sound of Kale's stirring roused Kasha from her contemplation of the mark on her wrist. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, concealing it, a sudden instinct to keep this new development private, at least for now. She wasn't sure why, perhaps a lingering vestige of her former life, of her ingrained habit of keeping her inner world hidden. Kale sat up, stretching his arms above his head, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator awakening from its slumber. He looked at her, his silver eyes still slightly clouded with sleep, but quickly sharpening, focusing on her with an intensity that always seemed to see more than she intended to reveal. "You're awake early," he said, his voice a low rumble, still rough with sleep. I couldn't sleep," she said, offering a vague explanation, avoiding his gaze. She busied herself with gathering her belongings, her movements slightly clumsy, her mind still racing with the implications of her newfound power. He didn't press her, simply observing her with that unnerving scrutiny that made her feel both exposed and strangely understood. He rose and began to gather his own belongings, his movements efficient and economical. They left the cave in silence, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The sun was rising above the peaks, casting a golden glow on the snow-covered landscape, a breathtaking vista that took Kasha's breath away. They continued their ascent, following the narrow mountain path, the silence between them punctuated only by the crunch of their boots on the snow and the occasional sigh of the wind. Kasha felt Kale's gaze on her, a silent question, a waiting presence. She knew she couldn't keep it hidden forever. She knew she needed to tell him, to share this discovery with him, to seek his guidance. But she still hesitated, unsure how to explain, how to express the mixture of fear and exhilaration that she felt. Finally, as they reached a small plateau overlooking a vast expanse of frozen wilderness, she stopped. She turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Kale," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to show you." He stopped, his silver eyes fixed on her, their intensity unwavering. He simply waited, his silence a subtle encouragement, a patient understanding. She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing the mark on her wrist, the intricate pattern of interlocking lines, the delicate tracery of silver against her skin. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, quickly replaced by a profound understanding, a knowing light. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the outline of the mark, his touch sending a familiar jolt of energy through her. "The mark of the Winterborn," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "It has awakened. It had appeared this morning," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I felt it, a tingling sensation. And then I could manipulate the ice." She demonstrated, focusing her will on a small patch of ice on a nearby rock. A faint blue glow emanated from her fingertips, and the ice shimmered, tiny crystals forming on its surface, intricate patterns dancing in the light. Cale watched, his expression a mixture of awe and pride. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her power, of her awakening. "It is a sign," he said, his voice filled with a newfound hope. "A sign that you are embracing your heritage, that you are becoming who you were meant to be." "But I don't understand," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "How is this possible? I've never done anything like this before." "The power has always been within you, Kasha," he said, his voice gentle. "It was simply dormant, waiting for the right time to awaken. The journey, the cold, the mark, they are all catalysts, triggering the release of your inherent abilities." He took her hand, his grip firm but gentle, a source of comfort, of reassurance. "I will teach you," he said. "I will guide you. You are not alone." His words, his touch, eased her fears, calming her anxieties. She felt a surge of gratitude, of trust, of connection. "Where are we going?" she asked, changing the subject, seeking a tangible anchor in this unfolding, unpredictable reality. "To Sanctuary," he said, his gaze shifting to the distant peaks, a hint of longing in his voice. "A hidden place high in the mountains. A place where the Frostborn once gathered, a place of power, of learning, of refuge." He looked back at her, his silver eyes holding a silent promise. "It is where you will learn to control your powers, to understand your destiny, to prepare for what lies ahead." The path looked treacherous, but with the mark glowing faintly on her wrist, and Cale beside her, Kasha felt a flicker of something she hadn't in years. Genuine hope. But Sanctuary sounded too perfect, didn't it? Chapter 8. The Unveiling of Ancient Lore. The journey to Sanctuary was arduous, a test of endurance and will. The path grew steeper, narrower, more treacherous, winding its way through jagged peaks and across icy precipices. The air thinned with every upward step, making each breath a labored effort. Kasha's muscles burned, her lungs ached, but she pushed on, driven by a newfound determination, fueled by the awakening power within her. Cale led the way, his movements sure and effortless, as if he were a part of the mountain itself. He seemed to anticipate every obstacle, every danger, guiding her with a silent understanding, a subtle reassurance. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant source of strength, of comfort. As they climbed, Kasha began to experiment with her newfound abilities. She practiced manipulating the ice, creating small crystals, shaping them with her will, her control growing with each attempt. She felt a growing connection to the mountain, to the cold, to the power that flowed through her veins. She also noticed subtle changes in Cale. He seemed more relaxed, more open. The guarded expression, the haunted look in his eyes, seemed to soften, replaced by a flicker of hope, a hint of warmth. Finally, after days of relentless climbing, they reached their destination. Sanctuary. It wasn't what Kasha had expected. It wasn't the grand fortress, a towering castle, a majestic palace. It was a hidden valley, nestled between towering peaks, protected by sheer cliffs and a curtain of swirling mist. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, a haven of peace and tranquility, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving landscape that surrounded it. A frozen waterfall cascaded down a cliff face, its icy tendrils shimmering in the sunlight. A crystal-clear lake reflected the towering peaks, its surface undisturbed by the wind. Ancient trees, their branches laden with snow, stood sentinel around the valley, their silent presence radiating a sense of ancient wisdom, of enduring strength. In the center of the valley, nestled amongst the trees, stood a cluster of stone buildings, their architecture simple yet elegant, their walls covered in intricate carvings, their roofs adorned with shimmering crystals. It was a place that seemed both ancient and timeless, a place where the past and the present converged. This is sanctuary? Kasha asked, her voice filled with awe, with disbelief. Kale nodded, a faint smile touching his lips, a hint of pride in his eyes. Yes, he said. This is where the Frostborn lived, learned, and thrived. This is where we will rebuild. Rebuild. The word resonated with Kasha, a heavy weight of responsibility, of destiny. She was no longer just an apothecary from a small town. She was a part of something bigger, something ancient, something powerful. They entered the valley, the air growing warmer, the silence deeper, more profound. The stone buildings were surprisingly well preserved, as if time had stood still within the protective embrace of the mountains. Kale led her to a large, central building, its entrance adorned with a massive archway carved with intricate depictions of Frostborn warriors, of mythical creatures, of ancient rituals. It was the library, he explained, the repository of the Frostborn's knowledge, their history, their magic. Inside, the air was cool and dry, carrying the scent of old parchment, of dried herbs, of magic. Rows upon rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes, with scrolls, with crystals, with artifacts of a bygone era. Kasha felt a sense of overwhelming awe, of reverence. This was more than just a library, it was a treasure trove of knowledge, a window into the past, a key to the future. Kale led her to a large, circular chamber at the heart of the library. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone table, its surface covered in intricate carvings, its edges adorned with shimmering crystals. This is where the elders gathered, he said, his voice echoing with reverence. This is where they studied, debated, and made decisions that shaped the fate of the Frostborn. He gestured toward the shelves, towards the countless tomes and scrolls. And this, he said, is where you will learn. This is where you will discover the truth about your heritage, about your powers, about your destiny. He began to pull books from the shelves, ancient tomes bound in leather, their pages yellowed with age, their script intricate and unfamiliar. He laid them on the table, opening them carefully, revealing diagrams, illustrations, and texts that spoke of ancient rituals, of forgotten magic, of the power of the Frostborn. We will start with the basics, he said, his voice patient, encouraging. The history of the Frostborn, the principles of our magic, the nature of your abilities. He began to teach her, guiding her through the ancient texts, explaining the complex concepts, the intricate rituals, the subtle nuances of Frostborn magic. He taught her how to control her powers, how to shape the ice, how to draw energy from the mountain, how to harness the power of winter. He taught her of Lycus, too, and of the lingering threat. But for now, within these walls, Kasha felt a sense of peace she'd never known. Only a faint hum, almost a warning, from the mark on her wrist, kept her from fully relaxing. What did it mean? Chapter 9. Bonds forged in ice and fire. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Kasha immersed herself in the ancient lore of the Frostborn, devouring the knowledge contained within the library's countless tomes and scrolls. Under Kale's patient tutelage, her understanding of her powers grew, her control sharpened, her connection to the mountain deepened. She learned to shape the ice with increasing precision, creating intricate sculptures, forming protective shields, summoning blasts of frigid air. She learned to draw energy from the mountain, feeling the raw power of winter flowing through her veins, invigorating her spirit, enhancing her abilities. She learned to sense the subtle shifts in the weather, to anticipate the coming storms, to feel the pulse of the mountain itself. But it wasn't just her magical abilities that were developing. Her relationship with Kale was evolving, transforming, deepening. The initial fear, the uncertainty, the awe, gradually gave way to trust, to respect, to something more. They spent hours together, studying the ancient texts, practicing their magic, exploring the hidden valley. They shared meals, stories, and silences that spoke volumes. They learned about each other, their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Kasha discovered a vulnerability beneath Kale's stoic exterior, a deep-seated sorrow, a lingering trauma from the betrayal he had suffered, from the loss of his people. She saw the pain in his eyes when he spoke of Lycus, the bitterness that still lingered, the fear that the past might repeat itself. And Kale, in turn, saw beneath Kasha's initial apprehension, her self-doubt, her ingrained habit of hiding her inner world. He saw her strength, her resilience, her determination, her compassion. He saw the spark of power within her, the potential she held, the destiny she was slowly embracing. He challenged her, pushed her, encouraged her, believing in her even when she doubted herself. He helped her to overcome her fears, to embrace her powers, to discover the Frostborn she was meant to be. And she, in turn, offered him comfort, understanding, a silent support that eased his burden, a shared hope for a future they were building together. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, forged in ice and fire, in shared struggles and triumphs, in mutual respect and admiration. It was a bond that transcended their roles as teacher and student, as guide and follower. It was a bond of friendship, of companionship, of something deeper, something unspoken, something that shimmered between them like the aurora borealis in the night sky. One evening, after a long day of studying and practicing, they found themselves sitting by the frozen lake, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange, pink, and purple. The air was crisp and cold, the silence profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water against the icy shore. Kasha felt a warmth spread through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun, and everything to do with the man sitting beside her. She looked at Kale, at his profile silhouetted against the fading light, at the silver eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages, at the faint lines of sorrow etched around his mouth. "Kale," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. "Thank you for everything." He turned to face her, his gaze meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement, a subtle understanding. "You have nothing to thank me for, Kasha," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are the one who has given me hope, a reason to believe in the future." His words, his gaze, sent a shiver of warmth through her, a feeling that made her heart flutter, her breath catch in her throat. She felt a sudden urge to reach out to him, to touch him, to bridge the gap that separated them. And then she saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes, a vulnerability, a longing, a desire. It was a fleeting expression, quickly masked, but it was there. And it mirrored her own feelings, her own unspoken desires. The silence stretched between them, charged with an unspoken tension, a palpable energy that made the air crackle. The mark on her wrist pulsed with a faint, warm glow, a silent affirmation of the connection between them. The bond, however, felt fragile, like new ice. What if she was wrong? Chapter 10. The gathering storm of betrayal. The unspoken tension that had blossomed between Kasha and Kale lingered, a delicate, fragile thing, easily shattered by a wrong word, a misplaced glance. They continued their studies, their training, their exploration of sanctuary, but the air between them was thick with an awareness, a heightened sensitivity to each other's presence. Kasha found herself increasingly drawn to Kale, captivated by his strength, his resilience, his quiet intensity. She admired his dedication to his people, his unwavering commitment to rebuilding their lost heritage, his unwavering belief in her. And she found herself increasingly frustrated by the emotional distance he maintained, the invisible wall he had erected around his heart, a protective barrier forged from past trauma, from betrayal, from loss. She knew he felt it too, the pull between them, the undeniable connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. She saw it in his eyes, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, in the subtle touches, the lingering gazes, the unspoken words. But he never acted on it, never crossed the line, always maintaining a respectful distance, a careful control. One day, while exploring a remote section of the valley, they stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance concealed behind a curtain of frozen vines. Inside, they found a series of ancient murals depicting scenes from the Frostborn's history, their battles, their rituals, their connection to the mountain. One mural, in particular, caught Kasha's attention. It depicted a Frostborn warrior, his eyes glowing with silver light, standing before a towering figure shrouded in darkness, a figure with eyes that burned with a malevolent red fire. Lycus, Kale said, his voice tight with suppressed anger, his gaze fixed on the mural. Kasha looked at the depiction of Lycus, at the cruel, arrogant expression on his face, at the dark power that radiated from him. She felt a chill run down her spine, a premonition of danger, of impending conflict. "He looks terrifying," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was," Kale said, his voice heavy with bitterness. "And he is still out there, somewhere, gathering his forces, waiting for his chance to strike again." The thought of Lycus, of his dark power, of his lingering threat, cast a shadow over their sanctuary, a reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the protective embrace of the mountains. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the main hall, Kasha decided to confront Kale, to break through the emotional barriers he had erected, to address the unspoken tension that hung between them. "Kale," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we need to talk." He looked at her, his silver eyes guarded, his expression unreadable. He simply waited, his silence a subtle challenge, a hesitant invitation. "There's something between us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something more than just teacher and student. I feel it, and I know you feel it too." He didn't deny it, didn't look away. He simply met her gaze, his silver eyes searching hers, probing, questioning. "It's complicated, Kasha," he said, his voice low and hesitant.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice laced with frustration, with a hint of hurt. "Why is it complicated? Because of your past? Because of Lycus? Because you don't trust yourself to feel?" His expression flickered, a flicker of pain, of vulnerability, quickly masked. "It's not that simple," he said. "Then explain it to me," she pleaded. "Help me understand." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his gaze drifting to the flames, as if seeking answers in their dancing patterns. "I made a vow," he said, his voice low and heavy. "A vow to dedicate my life to rebuilding the Frostborn, to protecting our heritage, to avenging our loss. There is no room in that vow for personal attachments. For love." His words struck her like a physical blow, a cold wave of disappointment washing over her. She had known, on some level, that this was the reason for his distance, for his emotional restraint. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing him confirm her fears, was devastating. Before she had a chance to consider her words, Kasha lashed out. "So that's it? We just ignore this, pretend this pulling is nothing? That I am nothing?" Kale flinched, as though her words were physical. His silver eyes looked wounded, and something shifted in them. He stood up, a visible storm within him. "You are not nothing, Kasha. Don't you understand? I hold back, because you are everything."
But
what if Lycus finds you? What if he uses you against me? Against us? I will not risk that." Kasha stood to face him, her own anger mixing with her heartache. "So we live in fear? We abandon all hope of happiness because of him?" The air crackled between them, not with magic, but with raw emotion. The storm was about to break, and from the shadows, unseen, a pair of eyes watched, their crimson glow reflecting the firelight. Chapter 11. Flight through the frozen wilderness. Before either Kasha or Kale could speak another word, a deafening roar shattered the tense silence. The ground trembled, the walls of the hall shook, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Kale's eyes widened in alarm, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of a sword that Kasha hadn't even realized he carried. "Lycus," he hissed, his voice filled with a mixture of rage and dread. The crimson-eyed figure from the mural, the figure that had haunted their conversations, their dreams, had arrived.
"How?"
Kasia stammered, her mind reeling, her heart pounding in her chest. He must have found a way to breach the protective barriers, Kale said, his voice grim. We need to leave.
Now.
He grabbed her hand, his grip firm and urgent, and pulled her towards a hidden passage behind the fireplace, a secret escape route known only to the Frostborn. They ran through the narrow, winding passage, the sounds of destruction echoing behind them, the shouts of Lycus's followers, the clash of steel, the roar of magic. They emerged from the passage into the frozen wilderness, the cold night air stinging their faces, the snow crunching beneath their boots. They were outside Sanctuary's protective embrace, exposed, vulnerable. Where are we going? Kasia asked, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her legs burning with exertion. Anywhere but here, Kale said, his voice tight with urgency. We need to get as far away from Sanctuary as possible. He'll be looking for us, for you. They ran through the snow-covered landscape, the moon their only guide, the wind their only companion. They ran for hours, their bodies aching, their lungs burning, their fear a constant presence, a driving force that pushed them onward. Kale, with his innate knowledge of the mountains, led the way, choosing the most treacherous paths, the most hidden routes, hoping to elude their pursuers. But Lycus's forces were relentless, their presence a constant threat, a shadow that followed them wherever they went. They could hear them, the howls of their wolves, the shouts of their warriors, the crackle of their magic, growing closer, ever closer. We can't outrun them, Kasia said, her voice filled with despair, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. Kale stopped, his gaze sweeping the surrounding landscape, his mind racing, searching for a solution, a way to escape the inevitable. He spotted a narrow crevice in a nearby cliff face, a hidden fissure barely visible in the dim moonlight. In there, he said, pointing towards the crevice. It's our only chance. They squeezed through the narrow opening, finding themselves in a small, hidden cave, a temporary refuge from the pursuing forces. They huddled together in the darkness, their bodies trembling with cold and fear, their breaths mingling in the frigid air. They could hear Lycus's forces searching for them, their shouts echoing through the mountains, their presence a palpable threat. He'll find us, Kasia whispered, her voice filled with terror. Kale put a finger to her lips, silencing her. He listened intently, his senses straining, trying to pinpoint the location of their pursuers. He closed his eyes, focusing his will, drawing on the power of the mountain, extending his awareness, seeking a way out, a path to safety. He felt it, a faint flicker of energy, a hidden passage, a secret tunnel leading deep into the mountain, a forgotten escape route used by the Frostborn in times of danger. There's another way, he said, his voice barely a whisper. A hidden tunnel. But it's dangerous. Dangerous is better than captured, Kasia said, her voice firm, her fear tempered by a newfound determination. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her courage, of her resilience. He led her deeper into the cave, to a hidden opening concealed behind a loose rock. They entered the tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole, the silence absolute, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water and the faint whisper of a hidden wind that seemed to be saying, hurry. Where they would emerge, neither of them knew. But it had to be better than facing Lycus, hadn't it? Chapter 12. The Price of a Stolen Kiss. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something ancient, something magical. Kasia and Kale moved slowly, carefully, their hands brushing against the cold, rough walls, their feet feeling for solid ground in the darkness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their ragged breaths and the occasional drip of water. Kale led the way, his senses heightened, his instincts guiding him through the labyrinthine passage. Kasia followed close behind, her hand gripping his, her only anchor in the overwhelming darkness. She trusted him, implicitly. She trusted his strength, his knowledge, his unwavering commitment to protecting her. But the events of the past few hours, the destruction of Sanctuary, the relentless pursuit by Lycus, The unspoken tension that still lingered between them, it all weighed heavily on her, a burden of fear, of uncertainty, of regret. "Kale," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the silence. "About what I said," before he stopped, his body tense, his hand tightening around hers. He didn't turn to face her, his back to her, his silhouette a dark outline in the faint glow of a phosphorescent moss that clung to the tunnel walls. "Don't," he said, his voice low and strained. "Don't apologize. You were right. I have been holding back. Afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked, her voice soft, gentle. "Afraid of me? Afraid of us?" He turned to face her, his silver eyes barely visible in the dim light, but their intensity, their vulnerability, was palpable. "Afraid of losing you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Afraid of what Lycus might do if he knew how much he couldn't finish the sentence. The words caught in his throat, the unspoken emotion hanging heavy in the air. Kasha reached out, her hand gently cupping his cheek, her touch sending a familiar jolt of energy through him, through her. She felt the roughness of his stubble, the warmth of his skin, the tension that radiated from him. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'm not afraid of Lycus. I'm not afraid of us." She leaned in, her lips brushing against his, a tentative, hesitant touch, a silent question, a desperate plea. He didn't resist, didn't pull away. He met her kiss, his lips soft and yielding, his response hesitant at first, then growing stronger, more passionate, more desperate. It was a kiss born of fear, of uncertainty, of desperation. But it was also a kiss of longing, of desire, of a connection that transcended words, that defied logic, that defied the danger that surrounded them. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a kiss that acknowledged the unspoken bond between them, a kiss that unleashed a power they couldn't control, a power that both terrified and exhilarated them. As they kissed, the tunnel around them seemed to shimmer, to vibrate, to pulse with a hidden energy. The phosphorescent moss glowed brighter, casting an ethereal light on their faces, on their intertwined bodies. The mark on Kasha's wrist burned with a fierce intensity, a tangible manifestation of the power that surged through her, through them. They broke apart, breathless, their hearts pounding, their eyes locked in a gaze that held both fear and wonder. "We shouldn't have," Kale began, his voice ragged, his expression conflicted. "But we did," Kasha finished, her voice firm, unwavering. "And I don't regret it." She didn't. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, despite the potential consequences, she didn't regret the kiss, the connection, the unspoken promise it represented. Suddenly, a distant rumble echoed through the tunnel, a sound that grew louder, closer, more menacing. "He's found us," Kale said, his voice grim. "He's using magic to collapse the tunnel." They had to move. Now. The kiss had changed everything, and yet, nothing at all. Lycus was still coming. And they were trapped. The price, it seemed, had already been paid. Chapter 13. Revelations in the Crystal Caves. The rumble grew into a deafening roar, the tunnel shaking violently, dust and debris raining down on them. Kale grabbed Kasha's hand, pulling her along, urging her to run faster, deeper into the labyrinth. "We need to find a way out," Kasha shouted over the din, her voice filled with panic. "There's a chamber ahead," Kale replied, his voice strained, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "A place of power, it might offer some protection." They ran blindly through the darkness, the tunnel collapsing behind them, the roar of Lycus's magic pursuing them like a relentless beast. They stumbled, fell, picked themselves up, and ran again, driven by a primal instinct to survive. Finally, they reached the chamber. It was a vast cavern, its walls lined with shimmering crystals of all shapes and sizes, their surfaces reflecting the faint light of the phosphorescent moss, creating a dazzling display of color and light. In the center of the chamber stood a massive crystal pillar, pulsating with a powerful energy, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. "This is it," Kale said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. the heart of the mountain, the place of ancient power. As they entered the chamber, the roaring subsided, the shaking stopped, the dust settled. The crystals seemed to absorb the sound, the vibrations, creating a pocket of eerie silence, a temporary refuge from the chaos outside. But they knew it wouldn't last. Lycus would find them, eventually. He was too powerful, too determined, too relentless. Kasha looked around the chamber, her eyes wide with awe and fear. The crystals shimmered with an otherworldly light, their energy palpable, almost overwhelming. She felt a connection to them, a resonance with their power, a sense of belonging. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a nexus of power," Kale explained, his gaze fixed on the central crystal pillar. "A place where the mountain's energy converges, where the veil between worlds is thin, where secrets are revealed." Secrets. The word resonated with Kasha, a reminder of the hidden truths she was seeking, the mysteries of her past, the destiny she was slowly embracing. As she looked at the central crystal pillar, she noticed something etched into its surface, a series of intricate symbols, similar to the mark on her wrist, but more complex, more elaborate. "Kale," she said, pointing to the symbols. "What do they mean?" He approached the pillar, his eyes tracing the intricate patterns, his expression growing increasingly solemn, increasingly troubled. "It's a prophecy," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "An ancient prophecy about the Frostborn, about the last descendant, about the ultimate sacrifice." The ultimate sacrifice. The word sent a chill down Kasha's spine, a premonition of doom, of a destiny she wasn't sure she was ready to face. What does it say?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kale hesitated, his gaze meeting hers, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "It says that the last of the Frostborn will have to choose between love and duty, between personal happiness and the fate of the world." The prophecy hung in the air, heavy and ominous, a crushing weight of responsibility, of destiny. Kasha felt a cold dread creeping into her heart, a sense of impending doom, of a choice she didn't want to make. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, denying the inevitable, refusing to accept the cruel twist of fate. "There has to be another way." Suddenly, the chamber was flooded with a blinding red light. Lycus stood at the entrance, his eyes burning with malevolent fire, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "There is no other way, Kasha," he said, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Your destiny is to die." He raised his hand, and a bolt of dark energy surged towards her, swift and deadly. Kale reacted instantly, pushing Kasha out of the way, taking the full force of the blast himself. He cried out in pain, his body thrown back against the crystal pillar, the impact shattering the ancient stone. As he fell, a section of the pillar broke away, revealing a hidden cavity. And within that cavity something glowed. It was a weapon or something more. Kasha knew, instinctively, that it held the key. But Kale was down, and Lycus was advancing. Chapter 14. The Heart of the Mountain's Fury. Kasha watched in horror as Kale crumpled to the ground, his body limp, his silver eyes clouded with pain. Lycus's cruel laughter echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the shimmering crystals, a mocking celebration of his apparent victory. "Foolish boy," Lycus sneered, his gaze shifting to Kasha, his eyes burning with a predatory hunger. "Did you really think you could defy me? Did you really think you could protect her?" Kasha ignored him, her focus solely on Kale. She knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his body, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing, desperately searching for a way to help him. She felt for a pulse, her fingers trembling, her fear threatening to overwhelm her. She found it, faint and weak, but it was there. He was alive, but barely. She looked at the wound on his chest, a gaping hole burned into his flesh by Lycus's dark magic. It was a wound that should have been fatal, a wound that no ordinary healing could mend. But Kasha was no ordinary healer. She was a Frostborn, a wielder of ancient magic, a descendant of a lineage with a deep connection to the mountain, to the power of winter. She closed her eyes, focusing her will, drawing on the energy of the crystals, on the power of the mountain, on the love that burned within her, a love for Kale, a love for her heritage, a love for the world she was destined to protect. She placed her hands on his wound, channeling her energy, her magic, her love, into his body. A faint blue glow emanated from her fingertips, a soft, ethereal light that enveloped his wound, that seemed to seep into his very being. She felt the cold, the raw power of winter, flowing through her, surging into him, fighting against the darkness, against the death that threatened to claim him. It was a desperate gamble, a risky maneuver, a test of her strength, her will, her faith. She didn't know if it would work, if she was strong enough, if her powers were sufficient. But she had to try. She had to save him. Lycus watched, his amusement fading, replaced by a flicker of concern. He had underestimated her, underestimated the power of the Frostborn, underestimated the strength of her love. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice laced with a hint of uncertainty. "Saving him," Kasia said, her voice firm, unwavering, her gaze fixed on Kale, her focus absolute. She continued to channel her energy, her magic, her love, into him, ignoring Lycus, ignoring the danger, ignoring the pain that radiated from her own body, a consequence of the immense power she was wielding. Slowly, gradually, the wound on Kale's chest began to close, the burned flesh regenerating, the bleeding stopping. The blue glow emanating from her fingertips intensified, spreading, enveloping his entire body, a protective cocoon of light and energy. Lycus, realizing that he was losing, that his attack had failed, that Kasia was more powerful than he had anticipated, unleashed another bolt of dark energy, this time aimed directly at her. But before the bolt could reach her, the massive crystal pillar in the center of the chamber erupted with a blinding white light, a surge of pure energy that deflected Lycus's attack, sending it harmlessly into the cavern wall. The chamber trembled, the crystals vibrating with an intense frequency, the air crackling with power. The mountain itself seemed to be awakening, responding to Kasia's plea, to her desperate act of love, to her unwavering determination. The hidden cavity revealed by Kale's fall glowed with an even more intense, white-blue flame. It illuminated the object within, a blade of pure ice, intricately carved, humming with contained energy. Kasia knew, without a doubt, that this was the answer. The prophecy's weapon. She reached for it. Lycus roared in denial. But the mountain, it seemed, had chosen its champion. And as she grasped the blade, the chamber filled with a furious, blinding light. Chapter 15. Scars of the Past, Flames of the Future. As Kasia grasped the ice blade, a surge of raw power coursed through her, a force so potent it nearly knocked her off her feet. The chamber pulsed with light, the crystals resonating with the energy emanating from the blade, from her, from the very heart of the mountain. The blade felt alive. It hummed in her hand, a song of winter, of ice, of ancient power. It felt like an extension of herself, a conduit for the mountain's fury, a weapon forged for this very moment, for this very purpose. Lycus, momentarily blinded by the intense light, stumbled backward, his expression a mixture of rage and fear. He had never seen anything like this, never witnessed such raw power, such a pure manifestation of the Frostborn's magic. What is that?" he stammered, his voice losing its usual arrogance, its venomous confidence. "Your end," Kasia said, her voice echoing with a newfound authority, a power that resonated with the mountain itself. She raised the blade, the ice shimmering with an otherworldly light, its edge razor-sharp, its point radiating a chilling cold that seemed to freeze the very air around it. She lunged at Lycus, her movements swift and fluid, guided by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, an ancient knowledge that flowed through her veins, a legacy of generations of Frostborn warriors. He parried her attack, deflecting the ice blade with a shield of dark energy, the impact sending sparks flying, the chamber echoing with the clash of opposing forces. They their battle a dance of light and darkness, of ice and fire, of ancient magic and twisted ambition. Kasha, fueled by the power of the ice blade, by the energy of the mountain, by her love for Kale, fought with a ferocity she never knew she possessed. She was no longer just an apothecary, a healer, a woman of quiet routines. She was a warrior, a protector, a Frostborn, embracing her destiny, fulfilling the ancient prophecy. Lycus, despite his power, despite his centuries of experience, found himself on the defensive, struggling to counter Kasha's relentless attacks, her newfound strength, her unwavering determination. He had underestimated her, underestimated the power of the Frostborn, underestimated the strength of her love. And now he was paying the price. As they fought, Kasha noticed Kale stirring, his eyes fluttering open, his gaze slowly focusing on her, on the battle raging before him. He saw the ice blade in her hand, the power that radiated from her, the determination etched on her face. He saw the woman he loved, transformed, empowered, fighting for their future, for the fate of the world. He tried to rise, to help her, but his body was still weak, still recovering from Lycus's attack. He could only watch, his heart filled with a mixture of pride, fear, and hope. Kasha, sensing his gaze, met his eyes for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange of love, of support, of unwavering commitment. It was all she needed. She renewed her attack, her movements growing even faster, even stronger, even more precise. She drove Lycus back, forcing him towards the edge of the chamber, towards the entrance where he had made his dramatic and ultimately fateful arrival. Finally, with a powerful thrust, she disarmed him, sending his shield of dark energy shattering into 1,000 pieces. She stood before him, the ice blade poised at his throat, its chilling cold radiating onto his skin, a promise of death, of finality. He looked at her, his eyes filled with defeat, with resignation, with a flicker of regret. "You have won," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his usual arrogance gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Kasha hesitated. She could end him, here and now. She could avenge the deaths of countless Frostborn. She could eliminate the threat he posed. She could fulfill the prophecy. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not just a monster, not just an enemy, but a broken man, consumed by ambition, twisted by darkness, a victim of his own choices. She lowered the blade, slightly. The choice was hers. The prophecy demanded it. But what would she choose?
And at what cost?
Chapter 16. The Wolf's Embrace. The Winter's Curse. The ice blade trembled in Kasha's hand, its chilling cold a stark contrast to the burning conflict raging within her. She could end Lycus, fulfill the prophecy, ensure the safety of the Frostborn, of the world. But could she, a healer at heart, a woman who had dedicated her life to preserving life, take a life, even one as twisted and corrupted as Lycus's? "Do it," Kale said, his voice weak but firm, his gaze fixed on Kasha, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. "He will never stop. He will always be a threat." His words echoed her own thoughts, her own fears. She knew he was right. Lycus, given the chance, would rise again, would seek revenge, would continue his quest for power, for domination. But still, she hesitated. She looked into Lycus's eyes, searching for any sign of remorse, any hint of regret, any flicker of humanity that might justify sparing his life. She saw only emptiness, a hollow void where his soul should have been, a testament to the corrosive power of darkness, of unchecked ambition. She raised the blade again, her hand trembling, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She closed her eyes, steeling herself, preparing to deliver the final blow. And then she felt it. A shift in the air, a change in the energy, a presence behind her. She whirled around, the ice blade slicing through the air, narrowly missing the throat of the figure that had appeared as if from thin air. It was a wolf, a massive, snow-white wolf, its eyes glowing with an eerie silver light, its fangs bared in a silent snarl. But it wasn't just a wolf. Kasha knew, instinctively, that it was something more, something familiar. The wolf looked at her, its silver eyes locking with hers, and she saw recognition. She saw Kale. She gasped, her mind reeling, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't understand. How could this be? The wolf shifted, its form dissolving, transforming, revealing the figure of Kale, standing tall and strong, his silver eyes glowing with an intensity she had never seen before. He was a werewolf. A frostborn werewolf, a creature of legend, a being of immense power, a guardian of the mountain. It was a revelation that shattered her perceptions, that challenged her understanding of the world, of Kale, of everything. Kale, she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief, with awe, with fear. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement, a confirmation of the impossible truth. It is part of my heritage, he said, his voice a low rumble, tinged with a hint of shame. A secret I have kept hidden even from myself. The transformation, the stress, the near-death experience, it had all triggered something within him, something ancient, something primal, something powerful. Lycus, seeing his opportunity, seized the moment. He lunged at Kasha, his hand reaching for the ice blade, his eyes burning with renewed hope, with a desperate desire to reclaim his power. But Kale, in his wolf form, was faster, stronger, more agile. He intercepted Lycus, his fangs sinking into his arm, his claws tearing at his flesh. Lycus screamed in pain, his body writhing, his dark magic flailing uselessly against the raw power of the frostborn wolf. Kale, driven by a primal instinct, by a protective rage, by his love for Kasha, fought with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He dragged Lycus away from Kasha, towards the center of the chamber, towards the massive crystal pillar that pulsed with the mountain's energy. He slammed Lycus against the pillar, the impact shattering the ancient stone, the crystals exploding in a shower of light and energy. And then it happened. The mountain reacted. The chamber trembled, the crystals vibrating with an intense frequency, the air crackling with power. A blinding white light erupted from the pillar, engulfing Lycus, consuming him, body and soul. It was a cleansing fire, a purifying force, a manifestation of the mountain's wrath, a response to the darkness that had threatened its sanctity, its balance, its chosen ones. When the light subsided, Lycus was gone, vanished, reduced to nothing more than a faint wisp of smoke, a lingering scent of ozone, a memory of a threat that had been extinguished forever. Kale, still in his wolf form, stood amidst the debris, his chest heaving, his silver eyes glowing with a fading intensity. He looked at Kasha, his gaze filled with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and uncertainty. He shifted again, back to his human form. He was naked, vulnerable. But the look he gave Kasha was filled with more truth than any words could ever hold. The curse and gift of the Frostborn, revealed. Chapter 17. A Dance with Destiny's Shadow. Kasha stared at Kale, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she knew with the magnificent, terrifying creature he had just been. The image of the snow-white wolf, its silver eyes glowing with primal power, was seared into her memory, a testament to a hidden aspect of his heritage, a secret he had carried within him, unknown even to himself. He stood before her, naked and vulnerable, the remnants of the transformation fading, leaving behind only the man, the warrior, the Frostborn she had come to love. But he was different now, changed by the revelation, by the battle, by the unleashing of his hidden power. She approached him slowly, hesitantly, her gaze searching his, seeking reassurance, seeking understanding, seeking the connection that had bound them together, a connection that had been tested, strained, but not broken. "Kale," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe, fear, and acceptance. He met her gaze, his silver eyes holding a vulnerability she had rarely seen, a hint of shame, a fear of rejection. I didn't know," he said, his voice raw with emotion. I didn't know this was part of me. She reached out, her hand gently touching his cheek, her touch sending a familiar warmth through him, through her. It was a gesture of comfort, of reassurance, of unconditional acceptance. It's okay, she said, her voice soft but firm. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change us. He closed his eyes, a sigh of relief escaping his lips, his body relaxing, the tension draining away. He leaned into her touch, seeking solace, seeking connection, seeking the love that had anchored him, that had saved him, that had empowered her. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, her body molding against his, a silent embrace that spoke volumes, that transcended words, that defied the fear, the uncertainty, the lingering shock of the revelation. They stood there, embraced, in the center of the shattered chamber, surrounded by the remnants of the battle, by the shimmering crystals, by the lingering energy of the mountain, a testament to their resilience, their love, their destiny. After a long moment, Cale pulled back slightly, his gaze searching hers, his silver eyes filled with a renewed intensity, a newfound understanding. The prophecy, he said, his voice hesitant. The choice between love and duty. Kasha nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words, with the memory of the ominous prophecy etched into the crystal pillar. She knew what he was asking, what he was fearing. I chose, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. I chose love. I chose you. And I didn't have to sacrifice the world. We saved it. Together. Her words, her conviction, eased his fears, calming his anxieties. He smiled, a faint, hesitant smile, but a smile that reached his eyes, a smile that spoke of hope, of relief, of a future they could build together, a future free from the shadow of Lycus, from the burden of the prophecy. Or so they thought. As they stood there, embraced, a faint tremor ran through the chamber, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the depths of the mountain. The crystals flickered, their light dimming, their energy waning. What was that? Kasha asked, her voice laced with apprehension. Cale frowned, his gaze sweeping the chamber, his senses heightened, searching for the source of the disturbance. I don't know, he said, his voice troubled. But it doesn't feel right. Suddenly, a section of the chamber wall crumbled, revealing a hidden passage, a dark, ominous opening that seemed to lead into the very heart of the mountain. A cold wind swept through the passage, carrying with it a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth, a voice that chilled Kasha to the bone. Not yet the voice was ancient, powerful, and filled with a malevolent intent. It was not Lycus's voice. It was something older, something darker, something far more dangerous. The mountain, it seemed, was not yet finished with them. Destiny still had a dance to do, and its shadow was long, and deep, and cold. Chapter 18. The Breaking of the Ancient Chains. The chilling whisper echoed through the chamber, sending a shiver of dread down Kasha's spine. The air grew colder, the crystals dimming further, their energy seemingly drained by the unseen presence that emanated from the newly revealed passage. What was that? Kasha asked again, her voice barely a whisper, her hand instinctively reaching for Cale's. He gripped her hand tightly, his gaze fixed on the dark opening, his silver eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. I don't know, he said, his voice grim. But it's something ancient. Something powerful. He moved towards the passage, his body tense, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. The same sword he had carried when they first met, the sword that now seemed almost insignificant compared to the power he had unleashed in his wolf form. Kasha followed close behind, her own senses heightened, her newfound magic tingling beneath her skin, ready to be called upon, ready to defend, to protect. They entered the passage cautiously, their steps slow and deliberate, their eyes scanning the darkness, their ears straining for any sound, any sign of the unseen presence. The passage was narrow and winding, the walls rough and cold, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something ancient, something metallic. As they moved deeper into the passage, the whispering grew louder, more distinct, more menacing. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around them, penetrating their minds, chilling their souls. Not yet your time, not yet your choice. The words were fragmented, disjointed, but their meaning was clear. The prophecy, the choice between love and duty, was not yet fulfilled. There was something more, something they had to face, something they had to overcome. Finally, the passage opened into a vast cavern, its scale even grander than the crystal chamber they had just left. But this cavern was different. It was not filled with shimmering crystals, with the beauty and wonder of the mountain's heart. It was dark, oppressive, filled with a sense of ancient power, of imprisonment. In the center of the cavern, suspended in mid-air by massive chains forged from a dark, unknown metal, hung a swirling vortex of energy, a maelstrom of shadows and light, of chaos and order. It was a prison, Kasia realized, a containment field for something powerful, something dangerous. And within the vortex she saw it, a figure, shrouded in shadows, its form indistinct, its presence overwhelming, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent fire. It was the source of the whispering, the source of the power, the source of the threat. What is that? Kasia asked, her voice trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. Kale stared at the imprisoned figure, his expression a mixture of horror and recognition. It's the source of Lycus's power, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The being he made a pact with. The one who corrupted him, who destroyed the Frostborn. The being stirred within its prison, its shadowy form shifting, its eyes focusing on Kasia and Kale, its voice echoing through the cavern, no longer a whisper, but a booming roar. You have interfered, you have delayed, but you cannot stop the inevitable. The chains that held the vortex strained, groaning under the pressure, the dark metal shimmering with an unnatural light. The being was trying to break free, to escape its prison, to unleash its power upon the world. Kasia and Kale knew what they had to do. They had to stop it. They had to destroy it. They had to fulfill the prophecy, once and for all. But how? The being was immensely powerful, even in its weakened, imprisoned state. It was a force of ancient darkness, a threat unlike anything they had ever faced. Kale looked at Kasia, his silver eyes filled with determination, with love, with a silent plea. He knew what was required. The prophecy's final demand. He took her hands. The chains, he said. They are the key. They are made from the same metal that bound the Frostborn's powers. That stole our magic. We must break them. He kissed her, a kiss of desperation and farewell. He was ready to sacrifice everything. But was Kasia? Chapter 19. The dawn of a new legacy. Kasia looked at Kale, her heart aching with a mixture of love, fear, and a growing sense of understanding. She saw the determination in his silver eyes, the silent plea, the unspoken sacrifice he was willing to make. She understood. The chains, forged from the same metal that had suppressed the Frostborn's magic, were the key to the imprisoned being's power, the source of its control, the means of its containment. Breaking the chains would release the being, yes, but it would also unleash the full potential of the Frostborn's magic, a power that had been dormant for centuries, a power that could, perhaps, defeat the ancient darkness. It was a gamble, a desperate risk, a choice between two terrifying possibilities.
But it was a choice they had to make.
Together, Kasia said, her voice firm, unwavering, her gaze locking with Kale's, her hand gripping his tightly. She wouldn't let him face this alone. She wouldn't let him sacrifice himself. They would face this together, as they had faced everything else, bound by their love, by their shared destiny, by their unwavering commitment to protecting the world. They approached the swirling vortex, the chains groaning under the pressure, the imprisoned being raging against its confinement, its voice a deafening roar that echoed through the cavern. You cannot win. You are nothing. Kasia ignored the taunts, the threats, the overwhelming sense of dread that emanated from the imprisoned being. She focused on Kale, on their connection, on the power that flowed between them, the power of the Frostborn, the power of love, the power of the mountain itself. They raised their hands, channeling their energy, their magic, their combined will, towards the chains. Kasha focused on the ice blade's power, on the chilling cold that could shatter steel, that could freeze the very air. Kale focused on his wolf form, on the primal strength, the raw power, the untamed fury that lay within him. A blue glow emanated from Kasha's fingertips, a white light from Kale's. The energies merged, intertwining, forming a vortex of power that swirled around them, that reached out towards the chains, that began to crack, to splinter, to break. The chains groaned, shrieked, protested, the dark metal resisting their efforts, fighting against the combined force of their magic. The imprisoned being raged, its shadowy form thrashing wildly within its prison, its voice a deafening roar of fury and despair. But Kasha and Kale didn't falter. They held firm, their hands locked together, their wills united, their love a shield against the darkness, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming power. They poured all their energy, all their magic, all their love into the effort, pushing themselves to their limits, exceeding their boundaries, drawing on the very essence of their being, on the ancient power of the Frostborn. And then it happened. With a deafening crack, the chains shattered, exploding into 1,000 fragments of dark metal, releasing the swirling vortex, freeing the imprisoned being. The cavern was filled with a blinding light, a surge of raw power, a chaotic maelstrom of energy that threatened to consume everything in its path. Kasha and Kale stood firm, their hands still locked together, their bodies shielding each other, their love a bulwark against the overwhelming force. The imprisoned being, now free, coalesced, its shadowy form solidifying, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent fire. It was even more terrifying than they had imagined, a creature of pure darkness, of ancient evil, of unimaginable power. It looked at Kasha and Kale, its gaze filled with hatred, with contempt, with a chilling certainty of its victory. "You have unleashed me. Now you will perish." It raised its hand, preparing to unleash its full power, to destroy them, to conquer the world, to plunge everything into eternal darkness. But something unexpected occurred. The shattered chains, the fragments of dark metal, began to glow. Not with the menacing aura they previously had, but with the bright, white blue of Frostborn magic. The stolen power, returning. And it flowed into Kasha and Kale, empowering them beyond anything they had ever experienced. The dawn, it seemed, had arrived. But would it be a dawn of hope or despair? Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The fragments of the shattered chains, now radiating with the reclaimed power of the Frostborn, flowed into Kasha and Kale, merging with their beings, amplifying their magic, elevating them to a level they had never dreamed possible. They felt a surge of energy, a surge of strength, a surge of connection, not just to each other, but to the mountain, to the ancient lineage of the Frostborn, to the very essence of winter itself. Kasha felt the ice blade in her hand humming with a power that resonated with her very soul, its cold no longer just a physical sensation, but a manifestation of her will, her control, her mastery of the Frostborn magic. Kale felt his wolf form surging within him, no longer a hidden, suppressed aspect of his heritage, but an integral part of his being, a source of immense strength, of primal power, of untamed fury, now tempered by his conscious control, by his love for Kasha, by his commitment to protecting the world. They stood before the unleashed being, no longer afraid, no longer intimidated, but empowered, ready to face the ultimate challenge, to fulfill their destiny, to protect the world from the ancient darkness. The being, momentarily stunned by the unexpected surge of power, by the transformation of its former prisoners, hesitated, its certainty faltering, its arrogance replaced by a flicker of doubt. What is this?" It roared, its voice still powerful, but laced with a hint of uncertainty. "This," Kasha said, her voice echoing with a newfound authority, a power that resonated with the mountain itself, "is the dawn of a new legacy. the legacy of the Frostborn, reborn, renewed, and ready to defend the world from your darkness. She raised the ice blade, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light, its edge radiating a chilling cold that seemed to freeze the very air around it. Kale stepped forward, his body shifting, transforming, the wolf form emerging, no longer a creature of fear, but a symbol of strength, of protection, of the untamed power of the Frostborn. The snow-white wolf stood beside Kasha, its silver eyes glowing with a fierce intensity, its fangs bared in a silent snarl, ready to defend, to protect, to fight. The final confrontation had begun. Kasha and Kale, united in their love, in their power, in their destiny, attacked the being, their movements synchronized, their magic intertwined, their wills united. Kasha wielded the ice blade with a skill and precision she had never possessed before, the blade moving like an extension of her arm, deflecting the being's attacks, striking with a force that shattered the darkness, that pierced the shadows. Kale, in his wolf form, fought with a primal ferocity, his claws and fangs tearing at the being's essence, his raw power disrupting its magic, his unwavering loyalty protecting Kasha, shielding her from harm. The being fought back, its power immense, its attacks relentless, its voice a constant roar of fury and despair. It unleashed bolts of dark energy, summoned shadowy creatures, manipulated the very fabric of the cavern, trying to overwhelm them, to break them, to destroy them. But Kasha and Kale held firm. They were not just fighting for themselves, not just for the Frostborn, but for the entire world, for all those who lived in the light, for all those who deserved to be free from the shadow of the ancient darkness. The battle raged, a clash of light and darkness, of ice and fire, of ancient magic and primal power. The cavern trembled, the air crackled, the very mountain seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome, for the dawn of a new era, for the triumph of good over evil. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kasha and Kale, their combined power amplified by the reclaimed magic of the Frostborn, managed to weaken the being, to disrupt its form, to diminish its power. Kasha saw her opportunity. With a final, desperate surge of energy, she channeled all her power, all her will, all her love, into the ice blade. She raised it high above her head, the blade glowing with an almost blinding light, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. And then she brought it down. The ice blade pierced the being's heart, shattering its essence, dispersing its form, extinguishing its ancient, malevolent fire. The being screamed, a sound of pure agony, of ultimate defeat, of final oblivion. The sound echoed through the cavern, through the mountain, through the very world, and then faded into silence. The darkness was gone. The threat was extinguished. The prophecy was fulfilled. Kasha and Kale stood amidst the fading echoes of the battle, their bodies exhausted, their magic depleted, but their hearts filled with a profound sense of peace, of relief, of victory. They had done it. Together. They had saved the world. They had made their choice. Love and duty. And the world was all the better for it. The final confrontation was truly of hearts. Epilogue. The silence that followed the being's demise was profound, absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos and fury that had preceded it. The cavern, once filled with darkness and dread, was now bathed in a soft, ethereal light emanating from the crystals, from the mountain itself, a sign of healing, of renewal, of the dawn of a new era. Kasha lowered the ice blade, its power now dormant, its purpose fulfilled. She looked at Kale, who had shifted back to his human form, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and love. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his touch sending a familiar warmth through her, a reassurance, a connection that had been tested, strained, but ultimately strengthened by the trials they had faced. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse, his expression a mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude. Kasha nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, tears of relief, of joy, of love. She leaned into his touch, seeking solace, seeking connection, seeking the comfort of his presence. They embraced a long, heartfelt embrace that spoke volumes, that transcended words, that sealed their bond, their love, their shared destiny. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged victorious, stronger, more united, more in love than ever before. They returned to Sanctuary, to the hidden valley nestled between the towering peaks, to the place that had once been a refuge, then a battleground, and now, finally, a home. They rebuilt, not just the physical structures, but the legacy of the Frostborn, a legacy of strength, of resilience, of compassion, of love. They gathered the scattered remnants of their people, those who had survived in hiding, those who had lost hope, those who had yearned for a return to their ancient heritage. Kasha, with her healing touch, her newfound mastery of the Frostborn magic, and her unwavering compassion, became a beacon of hope, a leader, a healer, a guide. She taught the younger generation, sharing her knowledge, her skills, her wisdom, ensuring that the legacy of the Frostborn would continue, would thrive, would never again be threatened by darkness. Kale, with his strength, his courage, his unwavering loyalty, and his newfound control over his wolf form, became a protector, a guardian, a warrior, ensuring the safety of Sanctuary, of the Frostborn, of the world. He embraced his dual nature, the man and the wolf, the human and the magical, finding a balance, a harmony, a strength he had never known before. They ruled together, not as king and queen, not as master and apprentice, but as partners, as equals, as lovers, their bond a symbol of hope, of unity, of the power of love to conquer even the greatest darkness. Years passed, and Sanctuary flourished. The Frostborn thrived, their numbers growing, their magic flourishing, their connection to the mountain deepening. The world was safe, the darkness banished, the future bright. Kasha and Kale, their hair now streaked with silver, their faces etched with the lines of time and experience, but their eyes still shining with the same love, the same passion, the same unwavering commitment to each other, to their people, to the world, often stood on the mountain peaks, overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange, pink, and purple. They remembered the trials they had faced, the sacrifices they had made, the battles they had fought, the love that had sustained them. And they knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within their souls, that they had made the right choice. They had chosen love, and in doing so, they had saved the world. And they had found a happiness, a fulfillment, a love that would endure, that would transcend time, that would become a legend, a story whispered on the wind, a tale told around the fire, a legacy of hope for generations to come. The mountain stood watch as it always had, and at its heart, two souls, bound by ice and fire, lived in peace, finally.